Hello, everyone. It is 12:02, so we are going to get started. My name is Stacy Owen. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement for the School of Business. And if you are here for the session about how ESG can be a source of competitiveness, then you are in the right place. We are really delighted to have 4 panelists with expertise in this area, as well as our moderator, Dr. Dan Fogel, who is a former School of Business Associate Dean and one of the founders of the graduate program in sustainability at Wake Forest. We are recording this session. We ask that you mute yourselves. We will take questions at the end, so you can type those into the chat. And Dan, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Hey, Dan, you're muted.
I got it. Okay. Yeah. All people in technology, right? So thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be back at the School of Business and helping out with the sustainability effort. We have some fantastic panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. After they introduce themselves, I'm going to ask a few questions to get us started on the conversation. And of course, you can send your questions in so that we can respond to that. So we're going to start with Scott Tu from Trane Technologies to introduce himself, and then I'll go down the panelist.
Thanks, Dan, and it's great to see everyone. Great to be here today for this Lunch and Learn. I'm happy to share my experience. I've been at what we now call ESG and Sustainability for quite some time with a large manufacturing company based in North Carolina, Trane Technologies. Some of you may have known the company as Ingersoll Rand. I'll explain a little bit about that later. Also about our journey too, but happy to be here today. I lead ESG and Sustainability for the company worldwide.
Thank you. And Kris?
Hi, everybody. I'm a Wake Forest MBA alum from 1993 and currently a business consultant and executive coach with a focus on helping leaders grow, develop, guide their companies to sustainable and long-lasting success. I've spent close to 28 years at the Center for Creative Leadership based in Greensboro, North Carolina, in marketing, sales, product development, innovation, and strategic planning roles over the course of that time. So right now in my work with Global Imprint, I'm excited to spend time with companies who are embarking on their ESG journey. So I'm really happy to be here, Dan.
Thank you. Jon?
Yeah, so I help run the sustainability graduate programs at Wake. I'm a professor of practice in the business school and in our program. And my job is fun because I get to train the future leaders in the sustainability space. So I'm excited to be here too.
Thank you. Serena?
Thank you. My name is Serena Rwejuna. I go by Serena, and I'm a partner in the Washington, D.C. office of the global law firm White & Case, where I help lead the energy markets and regulatory practice. Renewables, ESG, sustainability, and energy transition are a core part of my legal practice. I advise clients on all aspects of those issues, whether it's regulatory and compliance, transaction-related issues, litigation, disputes, and investigations and enforcement. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that I'm a proud double Deek. I graduated with an undergraduate degree in psychology, as well as a master's in management. And I will add, I even recruited my little sister to follow along my footsteps, and she earned her MBA at Wake. So proud, double, triple Deek family.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's great. What a great panel. So let's start with you, Scott. I'd like to ask if you could tell us a little bit about the journey that Ingersoll Rand and Trane took to get to this point in the sustainability space.
Yeah, so thanks, Dan, and happy to always tell the story. It's been a meandering journey for us, but one that's very focused now. If you don't know the company Trane Technologies, you probably know some of our brands. We own the largest HVAC or air conditioning company in America. 1 out of every 2 buildings in the US depends on Trane for some level of comfort or controls of the indoor environment. We also own the world's largest transport refrigeration company called Thermo King. 62% of the world's fresh food delivered via Thermo King solutions every day in 140 countries. So we have a large footprint, but it's all about doing something around heating and cooling, which is a major contributor to greenhouse gases. 40% of a building's energy is typically related to heating and cooling, which equates to roughly 15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And that's the end of the journey. That's what's given us our North Star. That is also what led to a complete transformation of the company. We actually spun off our industrial businesses, those businesses with Ingersoll Rand in 2020. That's now a freestanding company called Ingersoll Rand. We had sold the industrial businesses, which were really industrial process businesses, pumps and those types of things, to a company called Gardner Denver. They kept the Ingersoll Rand name. But that's a separate company now from Trane Technologies. We are truly focused on being a climate innovator. In fact, the journey that began in 2010 was a direct lead to who the company is today. In 2010, the board asked then CEO and chairman Mike Lamont what his views of sustainability were. He didn't have a great answer. The board was asking because that was at a time when companies were being sued for greenwashing. Clorox and a few other companies were being sued. They were making claims that really weren't credible, and sustainability was being known as a sort of greenwashing marketing ploy, and things began to change very rapidly. Our company chose at that time to get very serious about making sure that sustainability became a value differentiator, one that could truly change how we think about product design, customer solutions, and fixing what's wrong, both in our own go-to-market strategies as well as what was wrong with our customers' facilities. And so that's where the journey began. We've done the hard work since then, but that's really the evolution, Dan, that led us to, in 2019, agreeing and deciding to completely transform a company, spin off some businesses, rename the company, and refocus our efforts on what Andrew Winston now would call net positive, which is a company that really goes to work every day thinking about how do we do things better, not just better than last year, but better overall. So that's the short story.
Excellent. That's really an amazing story, and going beyond just the compliance and cost cutting and really make it the DNA of the company.
Yeah, far beyond.
Yeah, excellent. So Kris, one of the interesting things about this space is the leadership skills it takes and the knowledge needed to work with ESG. I know you spent a long time thinking about these issues. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so my personal view is that any ESG effort, whether it's large or small, whether it's undertaken by an individual, a team, a group, a company, a community, it's really about change management and change leadership. And so I tend to see the leadership skills that are needed and capabilities are things like influence and resilience and business acumen and systems thinking, being able to lead in a matrixed environment. So much of this there's so many interdependencies that are important. And so leaders need the skills and capabilities to do that. And certainly, being a creative problem solver. And that's not to say that there aren't some very technical skills that are needed as well, especially in the environmental domain where there's specialized knowledge that's needed in climate and carbon and pollution and so forth. So I believe the leader's role is to understand what skills and perspectives are missing from their strategic conversations, and to find and include and give voice and include their voices in the company's strategic plans.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Hey, Jon, I know I want to follow up this with you because I know that the program trains people to actually be sustainability experts and leaders in this space. So what's unique about the sustainability training, and how can somebody get those skills?
Yeah, right. So of course you would come to our master's program at Wake, right? That would be a terrific idea. I think the key is integrative thinking and being able to have a conversation and work across disciplines, but then also across ESG. So I hear people talk about it. They use the word vertical and the verticals of ESG, but I don't think that's an effective framing or an appropriate approach to it. So it's really being able to understand the science, understand human systems. To get back to what Kris was saying, systems thinking is critical. And then something we do in our program is design thinking. And I think that it pushes us past data analysis and being data driven to being data informed. And so we ask questions about what could this future we're trying to shape look like, as opposed to basing what we do off after a representative sample of something in the past.
Yeah, excellent. And just a little bit more. So, and the students go out into the field and actually experience companies, et cetera, like that. There's a lot of practical, right?
Yeah, sure. I think the experiential component is critical to see the different kinds of challenges organizations face, and then to get a chance to integrate all those concepts and content into something actionable. So yeah.
Excellent. So Serena, I want to take us a little slightly different direction and talk a little bit about the guidelines. I know the Securities and Exchange Commission is working very hard. There's something called SASB that is trying to develop guidelines that are across organizations and be more consistent. Could you talk a little bit about these disclosures, the voluntary and then the required disclosures, and what your observations about that are?
Sure. So you hit the nail on the head. The SEC has periodically provided guidance to issuers regarding, in particular, their climate change related disclosures. For example, in 2010, the SEC issued a climate change guidance, and they noted that, depending on the circumstances, information about climate change related risks and opportunities might be required in a registrant's disclosures related to things like the description of its business, legal proceedings, risk factors, management's discussion and analysis of financial condition, results of operations. And that release outlines certain ways that climate change might trigger disclosure obligations under the SEC's rules. And there they noted legislation and regulations governing climate change, international accords, changes in market demands, and physical risk associated with climate change were also critical. Fast forward to 2021, 2022, given the increased focus on ESG, the SEC is once again taking a critical look at climate change and ESG related disclosure requirements. So currently, the SEC is seeking comments from investors, registrants, other market participants on climate change disclosures. And this has really come as a result of investor demands around climate change and ESG disclosures. In May of 2020, so you think peak of the pandemic, the SEC Investor Advisory Committee approved recommendations urging the Commission to begin an effort to update its reporting requirements for issuers to include material, decision useful, environmental, social, and governance factors. In December of that same year, the ESG subcommittee of the Asset Management Advisory Committee issued a preliminary recommendation that the Commission should require the adoption of standards for corporate issuer disclosures regarding material ESG risks. That is ongoing. As acting chair for the SEC at the time, Allison Heron-Lee asked staff to evaluate the Commission's disclosure rules with an eye toward facilitating the disclosure of consistent, comparable, and reliable information on climate change. The open comment period that I mentioned is a part of that process. So we have all expectation and anticipation that there will be increased required disclosures and increased scrutiny around those disclosures that have been made in ordinary course, both voluntarily and as a requirement of the SEC and other agencies and organizations that govern the transparency that companies have to provide to their investors and their stakeholders in the communities in which they operate.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so I know Scott Ingersoll-Rand's been a leader in this area because you have flirted with this one report. Could you explain a little bit about your stance on that? Because I think it's unique in the United States.
You talking about on our reporting structure?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been working on integrated reporting, to Serena's point, for many years now, as all of those standards that she mentioned have evolved. And there are many now. And I think where things are landing, to Serena's point, is all companies is finally we're moving to an apples to apples comparison. But I think we'll eventually go to an integrated reporting for all companies. If you're publicly listed, I think it'll be an integrated report. And there'll be as much scrutiny and as much care and control around your environmental and social data as there is for your financial data. We've had, financial standards for many years, as any of the MBA team here on this call knows, but what we've not had is any standards, certainly no standards that are accepted by all companies and by all groups for environmental and social data. And companies like mine or any other company, we have a tremendous amount of environmental and social data, but certainly it does not have the controls and the assurance around it as much as the financial. But that's where we're headed, though. We're only a few years away from, I think, all companies adopting a more integrated reporting structure. And I think there's value there. I mean, there's value in transparency. I've said this from the very beginning of our journey. The more we can collect the data and be transparent with it, whether we like the story or not, I think having the data in front of management teams, that's what begins to drive new behaviors.
Yeah. And the accountability, the same accountability as companies have for the financial data as well.
Absolutely.
Could be a game changer. So let me follow that up then. So what do you see are the opportunities then for a company to embrace ESG?
Well, see, we've sort of been walking the talk, and we've noticed that every time we've set a large commitment, and we've been setting what I would call aspirational style commitments since the 2014 timeframe. What we learned initially was that it exceeded our expectations internally with the amount of engagement from our employees who want to know, are we really serious about this? What can they do? What will change? And, they began to look for behavior change. They began to look for new investments. They began to look for upgrades. They began to look for things that we'll stop doing and new things that we'll be doing. And then on the other side of that, we've certainly seen the same thing external of the company. When you set these bold commitments and you begin to offer new solutions to the marketplace, you either find new customers or you exceed the expectations of your existing customers. And we've even had policymakers call us up to find out if we're really serious about some of our commitments. And certainly our 2030 commitments, we're the only company in the world that has a science-based validated target for scope 3 product emissions reductions of 1 gigaton. It's 1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. That type of commitment for a company that does a lot of engineering work is a very serious one that fundamentally changes all of your product portfolio worldwide. So that's one that gets everyone's attention.
So just briefly explain what you mean by scope 3, scope 1, scope 2.
Yeah, sorry. So scope 1 and 2 are those greenhouse gas emissions that a company essentially controls by its operations, by its supply chain. Scope 3 would be those emissions really outside of your control, that's embedded in the products that you sell and place into the marketplace. The new requirements for companies is that you no longer just focus on the things that are about your facilities and offices, but you also need to be accountable for what happens when your products go into the marketplace, which is scope 3. So very important that we focus there as well.
Kris, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I want to follow this up with Jon about supply chain because it's a nice segue. And so this notion of influencing the supply chain, could you talk a little bit about that? Is it, I mean, obviously it's important because the supplies you bring into your organization influences greatly your ability to reach sustainability goals, ESG goals. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I think the tool that companies look to and that we explore in our program is life cycle analysis, or the analysis of a product from the materials you extract to the end of use, like Scott mentioned. But I kind of pick on that word analysis because if you heard Scott's targets, the first thing I thought was, well, what does that mean? How do you reach those goals? And so I think that that balancing analysis with the ability to explore a possible future, is just as important. And those are specific skills that I think people overlook, jump to solutions that may not hit the targets. And if we can get better at asking better questions and exploring, I think companies will be better off. The other approach that I think maybe goes beyond life cycle analysis is circular design. And that's new, and designers are having to be retrained in it. I think it takes us looking at what we produce and how we sell them and how we interact with consumers in a whole different way. And I think a cool example of that is a product service flip. So instead of Rolls-Royce selling aircraft engines, they lease them. And then even I think Dick's Sporting Goods just came out with a program where instead of selling you a Yeti and a tent and all this, they offer you like a camping rental package.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Excellent. So some experimentation's going on. And again, you see, I hear this design thinking mentality come in as a way to explore how might we do things rather than other ways of problem solving. All right, Kris. So I'm an individual employee, right? I want to do something about this in my company that really hasn't even started on this journey. What do I do? How do I go about this? How do I convince my organization to implement ESG?
Well, that's a great question. So, I think it was Edwards Deming, the TQM, the quality guru, who said something along the lines of, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. So, and we talked about data so far. So I think that does go a long way to convince someone of something. And I think that it can certainly help in bringing ESG focus into a business. There's so many studies out. I just read yesterday a Mercer study that found that top employers, so top companies that are rated by employee satisfaction and attractiveness to talent, the ability to attract talent, have significantly higher ESG scores than their peers. So there are all these findings and all this data that an individual could bring into an organization. And even armed with all that, though, I think it sometimes may feel like an impossible task, something like boiling the ocean, and pun intended, right? But it's like, it's overwhelming. And so my advice would be to start small. It's look in the immediate area where you can influence and have an impact. Look for ways to connect with like-minded colleagues. Technology is great. There's so many technology tools available to connect people around tasks, and even within companies. Take time to get under the hood of your own company and understand the business model, how the business makes money, and how it delivers value to its customers. So I think showing up as a proactive, engaged employee, offering ideas, starting small, are some of the ideas that come to mind. I would actually love to kick this out to the other panelists too, to see if you guys have other thoughts or ideas about this.
Yeah, good. Anybody have any thoughts around this?
Yeah, Kris, I do. I think what you said is interesting. It sounds like it may take a culture shift in a lot of organizations to embrace like you said, dig into the business model. And I think that gets back to the exploration kind of thing. And I think if you can incentivize, or at least the research shows that if you can incentivize people on learning goals and questioning, not just hitting performance targets, that creates better outcomes, makes people happier at work, and on and on.
I think it's also interesting if you're in the business environment, what's the opportunity to solve a problem? First, you have to define what the problem is, right? So I think that's number one. We did that through a materiality assessment where you really look hard. You have to be willing to say that there will be some things we're not going to focus on, some things we will focus on, and make sure everybody's heads wrapped around that. It's not always about resource conservation. It's not always about let's go reduce water. Water may not be your issue as a company. It may not be your big issue. Maybe something fun to go work on, but it may not be the thing that changes the needle, that moves the needle. And so you have to, and that depends on the sector, depends on the company, and you have to do a true objective materiality assessment to figure out what's the big levers we have to focus on that truly make a difference. And I think that's a good starting point.
Excellent. Serena, do you have any comments on this area? I want to move on to something else with you, but.
What Kris said about, finding like-minded coworkers, there's real power in, the employee resource groups and that power of coming together and expressing what it is that you want out of your employer. And, quite frankly, we're in the midst of the great resignation, as some have called it, with such a tight employment market with, employees and particularly those who have niche areas of skills and experience. They are in a position to really demand of their employers what they want out of their work environment. So I just echo, the real power that there is there in that collective action. And in that, coming together to ensure that not only is your work environment one that you want, but your company is, being a contributor to the community in which you live and operate in a way that you would like.
Yeah. So, Michael Porter talks about this concept of shared value with the community, and that both interests can be solved or addressed. I want to change a little bit. We've been talking a lot about environmental challenges. What about this governance area, Serena? So what changes have you seen in corporate governance over the past few years? And then what guidance do you have for companies seeking to advance their governance practices?
Sure, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest changes is this buy-in and leadership from the top on all issues related to ESG. We are seeing companies invest in dedicated chief sustainability officer roles, greater build out of sustainability focused teams within the highest echelons of leadership of companies, and also in building out ESG and sustainability metrics as part of officer and director evaluation and compensation metrics. So, really kind of this idea of putting your money where your mouth is. And then, like we were just talking about, empowering individuals throughout the company to affect real change through, empowering the leadership within organizations to be advocates for good ESG practices, whether it's through employee resource groups, whether it's through community engagement. Scott earlier mentioned that employees are looking for behavioral changes. And so we see at the highest levels of governance that organizations are having to respond to that. In addition, investing in systems that provide accurate data that can be used in metrics-focused strategies and initiatives. And like Jon mentioned, data-informed strategies and decision-making. But all of this is not just voluntary. Many on the call may be aware that board diversity is another big area where companies are working on revising their governance practices. And we're seeing both voluntary and required changes in this arena. So NASDAQ's board diversity rule, which was approved by the SEC in August of last year, is a new disclosure standard that is designed to encourage minimum board diversity. And that directive requires companies that are listed on NASDAQ, the NASDAQ exchange, to publicly disclose their board level diversity statistics using a standardized template. So talking about transparency that we talked about earlier, and to then have or explain why they don't have at least 2 diverse directors. This requirement to put out for investors and for the community transparent and clear information about the S and the G portions of ESG is definitely a big change. And I think the takeaway here is that simply paying lip service to ESG and each of its components, including both the E and the S, is risky business.
Right.
Leadership skill, and that is another area that we can definitely get into. But having transparency, standardized reporting, having the push for ESG best practices coming from the top are critical, and that's how we're seeing companies kind of shift in terms of their governance.
Excellent. Yeah. So, Jon, I know you're doing some work in your PhD program on this topic, right?
Right. So, my research focuses on corporate governance, diversity, and CSR, ESG performance. And the research backs up what Serena's saying. What an interesting thing we found was corporations that had more than 2 female directors outperformed their peers in ESG, and that led to firm performance. And that relationship between ESG and firm performance, I think as academics, we're still trying to figure out if that's true and when it holds. And then the other interesting thing is those boards that had more females on them incentivize CEOs for sustainability targets at a higher rate. So I think that's interesting too.
Excellent, excellent. And Scott, I know your board is very much on board on this as well, right?
Yes, very much so. We've last year was a big year. We completely revamped our board committees. All board committees have ESG in their charter. We actually have a sustainability, a sole focused committee overseeing the board. It's full board agenda topics now. It's not just delegated to the committees. Our entire management team has ESG linked to their compensation. All salaried employees have ESG as a mandatory objective in their performance plans. So it's deep and wide, and it's constant. So it's like a constant drip on the rock that's changing everything. So yeah, it's been part of the evolution though. You know, these things can't just happen overnight. You don't shift board diversity, to Serena's point, overnight. You don't shift all of these things overnight, but you know, we were at a point, and I think that's where many companies find themselves right now. I think we're at it's a pivot moment, I think, for a lot of companies, where it is, if you're serious about this, now we want to see it go in all the right places. And to Serena's point, it has to start at the top, at the very top, but I think it also has to go to the very bottom. And so that's what we're searching for, those ways to do that too.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. I want to raise us a question a little bit. We've talked around it a little bit in terms of public policy, but companies have to advocate so they can change their strategy related to ESG, but also there's nothing like a good public policy change to change the whole game, if you will. So I'm curious, what do you see are the public policies that should be advocated for? And I know this is fraught with all sorts of politics, et cetera, but if you in the ideal world, what should we be pushing for?
You speaking to me, Dan?
Yeah, or anybody can take it.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, obviously, I think that this is probably the weakest area of all companies' performance. We've aligned on so many other things, but I do think that the voice of companies who are working hard to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions or their climate impacts, who are working hard on resource conservation, who are working hard to move the needle. The area where we've been, I think, most hesitant has been the policy-related work. I think that's changing, and I think that companies like the one I'm in have found a way to make sure our voice is known, to make sure that we're not. I think a first order business has been for companies is to make sure you're not saying one thing in your public disclosures and doing something different in Washington, D.C. or in state capitals. That's number one. Number two is then align what you're doing as a company with public policy and make sure that those policymakers know that it's important to you because it's important to your business and important to the employees that you employ. So that's what we've been doing, sort of in aligning all of those things. And I think that's important for any company of any size.
Yeah. For example, I mean, I'll let the rest of you say something, but should we advocate for carbon taxes, or are there specific policies?
We've advocated that pricing signals for carbon are the most transparent way to move the needle. I mean, it's also the fairest way, in my opinion. Yeah. And so we call it pricing signals because I think we can be, I'm not sure we have an opinion on what form it takes, whether it's a tax or it's some other fee or it's some other scheme of financing, maybe it's incentives. You know, you can also disincentivize certain things by incentivizing others. Right. And I think part of the magic of electric vehicle has been some of the incentives that happened. We know for a fact that it happens in efficiency decisions by consumers. And so, you know, there's a lot of pathways there, but we've been very bullish and very vocal about the need for a pricing signal.
Excellent. Kris or Jon or Serena?
Yeah, I mean, I think standardized reporting, I think that clarity reduces uncertainty for the organizations, but then us as academics too. Like, we don't know what we're measuring either almost.
Right. So it's not just a burden on you. It actually is a positive aspect for companies, right? Because then they know what the game rules are. Up to this point, it's been a little ambiguous. Yeah. Any other comments, Kris or Serena? And then we're going to move to questions. And then at the end, what I'm going to ask you is to give us like two takeaways, specific takeaways that companies, real essence of what you advocate for. But any other comments? And maybe we can move on to questions, Stacy. Would that be all right?
Sounds great. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat, or you can ask it out loud.
All right. We didn't get any questions yet. I got plenty of questions here. So
I have a question. Hi, everyone. This is Cynthia Forbes. So I think it was Scott had talked about greenwashing earlier. Because this area is I'm familiar with it. What is greenwashing, and can you give some examples of what that is?
Yeah, greenwashing would be when you're making a claim to the market for a product or a service, and you can't back that claim up with any unique benefits attached to environmental is what it's typically about. So just rebranding a product with a green label so that it appears organic, or maybe using words that seem organic as an example, yet the product itself hasn't fundamentally changed. I mean, that would be one example. It's probably a very simplistic example, but I mean, I think a lot of the greenwashing's behind us. Serena used the term too around reporting, because I do believe, to Jon's point, that reporting by companies in the past, disclosure has been sort of a pick and choose of the best examples of the year. It's almost a marketing move, and that's what we have to move away from. This is why standardized reporting is very important, I think, because that's the only way you can really compare one company with another's performance, as opposed to letting companies just use their marketing team to do a report. So I think that's the latest version of greenwashing.
So yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I was just gonna, add on that this issue of greenwashing is of increased importance to regulators across the globe. For example, last year, the UK set out their Competition and Markets Authority, stating that they had concerns around the increasing number of businesses that were misleadingly marketing their products and services as environmentally friendly. And so the UK CMA published a new green claims code. And that's
a great greenwashing phrase, environmentally friendly. Yeah.
But they've announced that they're going to start carrying out a full review of misleading sustainability and environmental claims beginning this year in 2022. And then, from the US perspective, climate change related disputes have evolved, and, they're much more than just kind of damage-based claims. And we've got this new and diverse class of climate related actions that are coming forth. And so in the past years alone, there have been some like 600 new cases that have been filed. And so we see shareholders and activists seeking legal redress over inadequate or allegedly fraudulent disclosure of climate-related risks and financial strategic reporting, all the way down to things like the way that products are marketed and services are described. So it's definitely an evolving area, and one that regulators across the globe are really focusing on.
So Rick Fleming asked a question, an interesting question, just to follow up. How important is it for the U.S. to align its disclosure rules with other country requirements?
Well, for those of us who actually produce reports that have to be read around the world to meet all the changing standards worldwide, I think it's very important. We're currently monitoring the EU taxonomy, which is the latest, greatest. They're actually ahead of the SEC's disclosure ideas. And so we're aligning our future reporting with the EU taxonomy currently. We think that will maybe be a high bar above the SEC's when the SEC's comes out. But I mean, I think it's very important that all these align. It's just for no other reason than just helping the companies only do it once the right way.
Yeah, excellent. So, Kris, we have a question. Maybe I'll just paraphrase. It might be good for you. Is that To what extent is this just the latest fad? I mean, we had a quality fad for a while. Now we have ESG fad, or is this really the essence of going to change business the way it is? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that is such a great question, and where I immediately go is the whole flavor of the month thing, and I think it really points to one of the challenges, or when things go wrong with implementing ESG plans. One of them is when it's separated from strategy. So, when it's just seen as, oh, here's an initiative, we got to do it, we have to check the box, we need to get this done, so just go off and do that. That's really problematic. So separating purpose from strategy is really a problem, and so they need to be integrated. And when you really get down to it, purpose is a very simple definition of what purpose is, right? It's a noun. It just is the reason for which something is done. So if you tie that into the company, it's why do we exist? Or you could even say, in the negative, what if we didn't exist? Would the world be better off without us? Would our customers, would our employees? And so I think this is where purpose ties in with ESG, and that it has to be intertwined into the business strategy.
Yeah.
That's not an answer to, are we seeing more of, is this the way of the future and all businesses are going to have to do that? I certainly hope so. What I don't like to see is when it's just treated as a separate initiative, something to, again, satisfy a box checking exercise. It needs to be much more than that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Any other comments? Or
I'll build on what Kris said and then tie it to something Scott said. I think I had notes to talk about purpose and strategy and ESG also, but I've heard this idea about empowering people, even at the lowest levels of the organization, to make choices in line with that purpose and strategy. And Scott, you said the word North Star, and that's how I like to think of it too. If the people understand what the North Star is, the choices they make can be aligned with the strategy and the purpose. And then I also think that it's interesting that people at Trane are incentivized for ESG, so they are empowered to make those decisions, and they matter.
yeah.
Yeah, but they can't do whatever they want. To your point, though, John, I think that North Star and aligning to purpose and being strategic about it is what's most important. Just because an employee may think that we need a community garden outside of a sales office may not be the best use of that employee's time and efforts on behalf of the company and while they're working. And so we do have to, and we've had to help people focus on things that are really important. Nothing against the community gardens. We have some of those, but I think you know what I mean. It was an example to say that every idea may not be the best idea, but we have to focus on some of those ideas and align them.
Yeah. So there's an interesting question about, and I'll generalize this question. It's John, you brought up this notion of lease versus buy scenario. And can you speak more about the environmental economies of scale that can be leveraged there? So, and that generalizes to lots of decisions about plastic versus paper, et cetera. Some of these specific decisions that organizations have to make. But let's go back to this lease versus buy. Is there any comment that you'd have about that in terms of environmental efficacy?
Not much more. It looked like Scott was going to answer, which I hope he does have a good answer. I think that we're all trying to figure out what circularity means, and especially as designers, what does it mean? In a consulting project we do with our students, they wanted us to basically do a life cycle analysis for an apparel company. And what we came back to and what we realized was that it really mattered on how on what happened in the initial phases of developing and designing the product. But no, I can't speak much more to the lease versus buy.
All right.
And lease versus buy, I think, is really important. We live in a culture where we love subscriptions, and there's a reason that I like Netflix now. I don't have to maintain a DVD player, a DVR player. It's all in the cloud. That's very simplistic. I think everyone understands that. We're doing the same thing though with comfort. We will lease you comfort now. We'll guarantee you 72 degrees for a certain price, guarantee that. You don't have to worry about the equipment. You don't have to worry about the maintenance. You don't have to worry about the service. nothing. And if we don't deliver on the 72 degrees, you get some money back from us. It's like a money back guarantee for comfort. You can do this almost in any type of situation. Here's what's so great about it, to Jon's point. It is the way. We guarantee other things for comfort for companies. And we do that, though. If you want the guarantee, then you have to let us also service the equipment when we want it to be serviced. We have to maintain it. It's the only way that we know the equipment's going to operate at the highest efficiency levels and at the way it was designed. We get to choose everything. So we love that. We won't guarantee it if we're going to depend on you to service it or you to maintain it. It's sort of like your car. You know, some people maintain their cars just like the manufacturer says to do it. Others stretch that out a lot.
Right.
But I think that the point is this: we can't get the circularity until you're in touch with your products throughout their entire cycle, to Jon's point. For us, though, our cycle is, I mean, we have engineers that will design systems and it outlives their career. I was in our remanufacturing facility in Charlotte a few months ago. They were remanufacturing equipment from a hotel in Portland, Oregon from 52 years ago. 52-year system had been shipped back to Charlotte from Portland, Oregon, to be remanufactured to go back in that same hotel, a historic hotel in Portland, Oregon. If you think about that, whichever engineer designed that system, it had outlived, the system's certainly outliving that engineer's career and will now outlive maybe another engineer's career. That's true circularity. Yeah, I think you can do that for most products that are manufactured. If you can't, then I think those are the things we have to work on.
And you make a really important point that the focus becomes on the jobs to be done with that product, not necessarily the product itself.
Yeah, that's right.
And how can we then marry that with environment ESG goals?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Kris, I thought you were going to say something, or did I?
No, I think we should continue with the questions that keep coming up. I can hold my thought. I see like 5 more in the chat.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm losing them here.
I think there's just one more.
Oh, okay.
That has come in. I think we've answered all the ones that have come in. We just have one more that came in about balancing the needs to maintain that guarantee and level of excellence with the consumer's freedom to use their equipment as they see fit. And I think that's a follow-up to Scott.
Well, I mean, you can use the equipment as you see fit. You won't get the guarantees, nor will you get the circularity. I think that you're going to miss some of the benefits of the system. It's the same thing with your car. You never have to change the oil in your car if you choose not to. I just think that's probably unwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, this consumer freedom is interesting because people, first of all, the affect around ESG products or environmental products is that they're inferior performance, which is not true.
Well, we know that's not true anymore. I think Tesla and many other companies have taught the world that.
It's clearly not. So there's kind of a marketing or narrative that has to occur as well. There's a role for every discipline to play in ESG. I mean,
we have more data. I have data analysts on my team now, Dan. I did not have data analysts when I began this journey. Mm-hmm. I didn't know the importance. We have data analysts. We have a sustainable economist on my team that I've hired. My team, I have lots of disciplines on the team. I have a circularity leader we just hired from AT&T who's leading a new way for us to handle circular design. So all of these disciplines and the experiences, I mean, we're pulling it in from all over because we now understand just what you said, which is it's touching every facet of who we are as a company. So we need a variety of expertise.
Excellent. This goes back to Jon's point about integration and Kris's point about where we can do it at any level, any place in the organization, et cetera. So we got at the point where I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to go around in order again, and maybe I'll go in the reverse order, start with you, Serena. Give us 2 takeaways, 2 very specific summary points that you would suggest to organizations.
Sure. So I will start by flagging, just how critical the COVID-19 crisis has been in terms of ESG, whether through the recent events have shown a light on the disparate impact that various segments of society experience, the focus on inequality and injustice, focus on things like sustainability and, truly what our future looks like. There's just an escalated environment where there is a demand from stakeholders, from all parts of your community to really have intentionality around ESG. So, the various areas where this can come into play are plentiful. There's stakeholder activism, there's the influence of social media, they're changing societal expectations. And so really being mindful of all of that and being aware of, how the various pieces all come together, I think is a critical takeaway. And we didn't get to talk about this, but, even down to the fundamental reframing of the purpose of a corporation. Over the last few years, we've seen this shift in corporate mindset as to, whether duties are owed solely to shareholders or whether there's that greater community and societal duties that must be upheld. So I would say that's one takeaway, and that could be an entire webinar in and of itself. The second, because I'm a regulatory attorney, I have to flag the reporting aspect of this. Ensuring accuracy and completeness are big issues. There's increased regulatory and litigation risk, and when you factor in things like lack of uniformity in reporting, particularly for companies that have multi-jurisdictional operations, staying abreast of the changes that are pertinent to your company, its operations, and the various places where it operates are critical. And, that takes a lot of internal dedication and resources, and the willingness to bring in outside experts and resources where necessary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jon?
Yes. So I'm surprised that I'm not surprised, but I didn't expect purpose to come up so much. But that was one of the thoughts I had was articulate a purpose that's aligned with your strategy and ESG goals and empower people to make decisions against that North Star. But I'm back to the what to do with data. And I think one of the easiest takeaways is to go take a design thinking class, because if you don't have the skills to imagine and act on a better future, I mean, I don't know what we're doing if we can't do that.
Thank you. Kris?
Yeah, so just one thing I was reflecting on, I think sometimes, when we talk about policies, we had a good conversation about policies, and it always kind of goes to, whether it's regulatory, government policies, and particularly around the environment aspect of ESG. And one thing that I just want to kind of point out is that, policy is at a local level with a company that might even be around human resource practices. And so kind of tying into something Serena was alluding to, and I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think about, policies and approaches in human resources hiring, and how that is a very important ESG effort that can be done. It's not that it's a huge cost. Certainly there's a time investment. And I've seen some companies who have just done a remarkable job about being transparent, like to the point of saying, here's the job. It pays $70,000. There's no negotiation. We want to take that out of the mix. We want to take out, educational requirements. I hope this may not be good to say at a Wake Forest event, but right, do you need a master's degree to do this or whatever, to really kind of shape the job so that it is about what results do we need that person to do? And let's try to eliminate unconscious bias and other things that are in job descriptions. And so there are, I guess my takeaway, which is starting to ramble, but it's just that the policies are not just, environmental, and they're not just from the regulatory side. They're also from the company policies around how they can enact the E, the S, and the G policies as well. So just wanted to make that comment. And then the other thing I will just leave with is, and I probably am not going to get the proverb exact, but the Chinese proverb that said, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So, it's like, it just get started, just do it. So that's my motivating quote to leave everybody with.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I think that the days of incrementalism are behind us. I think any company that's still positioning itself as we will incrementally do better than we did last year, probably not a company that any of us are aspiring to work for and to spend our careers, maybe even next year. So I'm looking for companies that want to win. And I think the way you win in the future is that you do the things that you just heard from these other the other panelists. It's got to be a company that's taking a holistic sort of systems level approach to what they're trying to provide for the world. And it's sort of an all-in approach too. If it's important to the company, somebody will have been made accountable for it. So it's okay if you're looking for career change or a job, ask the company those hard questions of who's accountable for all these things, whether it's diversity or equity or inclusion, sustainability, ESG, who's accountable? If they can't answer that question, then you probably should question whether or not they're giving you the right answer. That's my view, at least. And I've watched it happen. I've watched it unfold. I still sit with some companies who are still wondering, how far to go. And we're living right now in sort of a net positive, net zero world. And I know that's a daunting task and expectation that companies, especially those like mine that actually manufacture things, might commit to something like net zero impacts. And so, I think it's a good thing though, because if we can commit to that, once again, we're committing to something that fundamentally changes the company, and I think for the better, not just for customers, but I think better for local communities and better for our employees.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for the panelists. And I just want to comment that it's gratifying to me to see some of my former students here participating in the webinar. It's really, and I know some of you are working in this area and are really excited about it. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. Stacy, I'll turn it back to you, and thanks for your efforts also in arranging all this.
Well, I probably knew the least about this area than anybody on the call. So it was fantastic for me to hear your insights from Kris and Jon and Serena and Scott and Dan. I know that this is an area you're very passionate about. To our audience, your questions were great. I will send the recording of this session to you as soon as it comes through. And then I'll also share the contact information for all of our speakers, because they have agreed that if you would like to follow up with them or if you have questions, that they welcome hearing from you. So I hope everyone has a good day, and I look forward to the next time we're together online.
Thank you.